Hello, my name is Simone, and our group is talking about women in aeronautics today. I looked at Cosmo Magazine's readings concerning women in astronomy. The first reading talked about the Latina scientist Dr. Yara Collado Vega, who predicts the weather in space by analyzing parts of the sun during an eclipse. More specifically, within the corona of the sun, which gets blocked by the moon during an eclipse, a phenomenon called mass ejection occurs. It is from analyzing mass ejection that Collado Vega gets to make predictions about the weather in space. The importance these space weather predictions serve today is by predicting how mass ejection will affect our technology, for example, our phones. Thus, Collado Vega's work contributes greatly to our world as we know it today. The only downside that Collado Vega mentioned about her work was that she wouldn't be present on the upcoming solar eclipse expedition because she's a mom and therefore had other obligations she couldn't abandon. Similarly, the other women I read about had other obligations they were actually criticized for abandoning because of their studies of space. Such was the case for Maria Kuntis, who lived during the 17th century and was compared to the likes of Hypatia because of her many skills as taught to her by her father, who was a scientist, just like Hypatia's father, and also her connections to astronomers through her husband Elie de Lauen. But just like Hypatia and Miriam's stories, Kuntis had to use her husband's name to acquire information in letters about astronomy because it was deemed inappropriate to speak with scholars at the time. Nor were they women allowed to attend a university and thus were not provided with the means to conduct their own research. Maria's contributions published in her book support German literature today and is a trademark used by universities to show their support of women studying science. The last two articles I read discussed how women were recruited by Edward Pickerings to work as computers to analyze glass plates painted with watches taken from photographs of space. The work was considered tedious and boring, which was partly the reason why women were recruited for this role, amongst other reasons. Many women were drawn to this job because it was the only job that allowed them to work outside of their household and not as teachers after graduating with a degree. Annie Jump Cannon was one of Harvard's computers and actually is credited with creating a system which astronomers still use today to catalog the analysis of all the women who analyzed the glass plates in Harvard's laboratory.
Dr. Yari Collado Vega is a solar weather forecaster at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and she studies how solar phenomena affect Earth's magnetic field, environment, and satellites. She primarily works to alert NASA of the weather in space and makes predictions on how the storm could affect the planet. She received her master's degree in physics from the University of Puerto Rico and then earned another master's and her PhD at the Catholic University of America. Dr. Collado Vega says there are always hurdles and things that happen because you're a woman in science. There's always bias based on gender and where you come from, but NASA has been a great place to work. But that's kind of questionable, and there have been a lot of negative experiences for women at NASA and people of color in various scenarios. So, for example, according to a People magazine article, NASA had to cancel its first all-female spacewalk since they didn't have enough medium-sized spacesuits available. So, basically, astronauts Anne McClain and Christina Koch were assigned to do this historic walk on March 29th, and they could only construct Apparently, NASA could only construct one medium-sized suit in time for the walk. So McClain couldn't go along for the spacewalk, and a man took her place who could fit into a large spacesuit. NASA has had this history of gender and race-based discrimination in the workplace for years. The number of people in minority groups employed by NASA had gone up by only 1 percentage point from 4.10% to 5.19% from 1966 to 1973, which is when this article about NASA being criticized for firing Ruth Bates Harris, who was at the time Deputy Assistant Administrator for Equal Opportunities. So in 1973, Ruth Bates Harris was known as this black woman who gained a national reputation for her work as director of the Human Relations Commission in Washington, D.C. And after they decided to fire her, NASA, Representatives of civil rights and women's groups at several NASA centers publicly pledged support to her, and the Association of Women in Science, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights were holding meetings and plotting action against NASA for firing her. Meanwhile, kind of a seemingly more pleasant situation going on in India. BP, I'm going to mispronounce this, Dakshiani is known for being the former head of flight dynamics and space navigation for the Indian Space Agency, all while cooking for 8 people morning and night and doing the housework too, which is like incredible, but it's kind of strange that we know her and she's talked about for being able to do the housework while being a woman in science, and why it's like this wonderful thing. She led the team that told the satellite in India exactly where to go and ensured that it didn't deviate from its path. And she says, I say cooking is similar to coding, just as one small change in the code will result in a different number. Similarly, a small change in ingredients will result in a different taste, which is kind of sweet. And in a traditional Indian family setup, women are expected to take most of the burden in the household, and in most homes they do it without complaining. And Dakshiani is no exception to that rule. And so it's just a very interesting dynamic between women managing their households and having all of these outside duties in science, and also trying to make these extreme important strides in science, and the different dynamics between the US and India and all over the world. Thanks, guys.